That's okay.
Yeah, I think we can let people in now.
Okay.
Thanks, Sophie. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hope you're okay. Hello, nice to see you all here. I think we're just letting a few more people in, but I'll just get started really quickly with the housekeeping. So you're probably very used to this by now, but just as a quick reminder, if you can rename yourself to your real name, that would be helpful so we know who's on the call today. If you can mute yourself when you're not speaking. Please turn your camera on if you are comfortable with it, because it's nice to have a bit of interaction with everybody. If you have any questions, you can use the chat box, or you can also raise your hand if you think it's something really urgent, and we'll come to you when there's a bit of a break in the slides. We also on Zoom have the closed captioning feature available, which should be in the bar that comes up on your screen. It's this little CC symbol, so feel free to turn on the captioning if you wish. This will be recorded and the slides will be shared afterwards along with the recording, as per usual on the Open Academy school pages, respectively. So today is a bit of a different session because we have everybody on the call today, as it's a bit of a joint subject. So we're a few more people than usual, but there should still be a lot of chance for interaction and hopefully some chance to meet some more people who you'll see during the training week as well. In fact, I am just gonna stop sharing for a moment because I have a bit of housekeeping to go over apart from that. So we're coming to the week really quickly. It's not long now. I hope everybody's ready. Everybody's booked their flights, hopefully as well. But essentially, I just want to let you know that after this session, we'll be sending to everybody some meal choice spreadsheet, so you can fill in your meal choices for the week. And we'll also be sending round, in fact, I think Sophie can put the link in the chat already, a link to a WhatsApp group for you guys to help facilitate your own organization during the week, and any questions that you have for each other, if you need help and think or are a bit lost on like where you should be with the pre-training, so that you can chat amongst yourselves and maybe share resources or anything like that. We're doing it on a WhatsApp group because we did a WhatsApp group during the week, the training week last year, and people really benefited from it. It was not only good to remind people when they're supposed to be in certain places during the week, but for people to organize their own visits or trips to museums in their free time. So we're setting it up earlier this year, which was a suggestion from the participants of last year, so that you have a bit more time to get to know each other, chat, help each other out. We won't be moderating that, so talk amongst yourselves. And we'll, I think Sophie shared the link there, so you can join right now. You can also create your own chats within that community and yeah, just run with it basically. Great, that's everything from me. So I will now pass over to Claudia and she's going to introduce the session.
Yes, thank you very much. So Rachel, if you can reshare the slides. So very welcome also from my side to all of you. It's great to see so many people on this webinar. And as Rachel mentioned, it's a little bit an unusual webinar. It's the first time both schools are joining a webinar together. So next slide, please. And I would just give you a short overview on, you might know the most of us, who we are. A very welcome from the whole Aurora team. This time we might not have time to go through all, but I'm pretty sure we can meet all together in the training week in Barcelona very soon. So next slide, please. And it's a great pleasure to introduce you to our colleagues and dear friends who will run this meeting on drug repurposing on this exciting topic today. So a very welcome to Rick Thompson from Beacon, and to Eve Hewitt. They will introduce you to this very exciting topic on repurposing. Next slide, please. But I give them then the floor to introduce themselves. And here just a few slides on what we are doing today. So as I mentioned, this is both schools together. So we have more than 70 participants from more than 20 different countries today. In the next slide, you can see that we have participants and representatives for more than 50 diseases, which is quite amazing, I would say. And then we have just created in the next slides a few very easy icebreakers. This time, unfortunately, we will not have time to go to different breakout sessions, so I would love that you use the emojis and reactions you can find down in the bar to indicate for all of us, what do you prefer? Are you a coffee addicted? The last slide, or a tea addicted? I'm pretty sure I'm personally a super coffee addicted, but I know that, for example, our UK colleagues are more tea addicted. So please indicate with a thumb up, coffee or tea. What do you prefer in the morning to start a good day? Unfortunately, I cannot see your images, but I'm pretty sure you will react.
I think we can see if you click on participants, you can see the numbers going up and down. Claudia, so I hope you can see that. I think coffee is winning at the moment.
Coffee is winning.
Yeah.
Pretty sure we will have some good coffee in Barcelona too. So maybe next slide. So the next question. And this is now as summer and holidays are approaching. So are you more a beach type, or do you prefer staying in the mountains? Thumbs up for beach and red heart for mountains.
Beach is definitely winning.
Beach is winning, surprisingly. I'm more the mountains. I'm
me
more the
too.
mountains person. But I think both of them are super good. But happy that beach is winning, so I think we can enjoy some very nice days on the Barcelona beach in the upcoming weeks. And next icebreaker question. This is the hard question. So are you more an early bird or a night owl?
Oh, definitely night owls. Oh, it's quite even. It's quite even.
Great. Thank you to all of you for participating in this very easy icebreaker. And I'm pretty sure we will have the opportunity to exchange and know each other more personally also during the week in Barcelona. And I'm now over to Eve and Rick from Beacon to introduce you to this exciting topic on repurposing.
Fantastic. I will try and share my screen quickly. Hopefully you can see that okay. Excellent, cool. I will be in Barcelona for a day. I'll be sat with a cup of tea on the beach in the evening and having a nice time. Look forward to seeing you there. My name is Rick. I am CEO at Beacon for Rare Diseases. So we are a charity based in the UK that focuses on trying to find ways to support rare disease patient organisations to form, grow and professionalise their work, and hopefully help you guys do what you want to do and be as successful as you can in representing your rare patient communities. And as part of that work, we've done a lot on drug repurposing for a number of years now. And the primary thinking there is we believe repurposing is an approach that gives patient groups a chance to move research forward in a meaningful way and hopefully in a way that can benefit patients. And that's what myself and Eve will be talking to you about over the next hour or so, I guess. I will just note it's the Easter holidays still here. I've got some kids at home, and if I do get invaded by a tiny child who's already burst through the door twice since we started broadcasting, then apologies, but she's very cute. If nothing else, that'd be a nice interlude for your day. She doesn't know about repurposing though, sadly. I will train her soon. What we're going to talk about then over the course of today are these three major topics. I'm going to start with hopefully a brief talk to help you understand why repurposing is relevant to the rare disease community. That's you. I'm going to hand over to Eve, who's going to dive into really the repurposing landscape and take you through how that's really changed and evolved in the last few years and the types of support that are now available to help you think about repurposing projects for your rare condition, and how that hopefully makes repurposing for your rare disease a more tractable problem. And then finally, I will try and dive into some nitty-gritty thinking about the strategy around repurposing. How do you think about moving one of these projects forward in a way that gives you a real chance to make one of these treatments actually benefit patients? And that's what this is all about. There's no point doing research and developing a treatment if patients can't access it. And I think that's a key piece to touch on towards the end of the session. So nice and simple at the start, why repurpose drugs for rare conditions? Hopefully all of you know the answer to the first question, which is what is drug repurposing? But for those that don't, repurposing is recycling. It's kind of as simple as that. It's all about really basically taking a drug that exists on the market and finding a new condition that it can treat. And the way you want to ideally do that is by running clinical trials and doing research to prove it's safe and effective or efficacious in that completely different condition. And this will hopefully mean you generate a treatment for a community in the rare disease space that probably never had a treatment previously, with some really robust evidence to move it forward. That sounds great, but what we generally hear about in the world of rare diseases are these types of research, these different things. We hear about de novo drug discovery, creating completely new compound and take it to the market. We hear about the importance of genomics. That's revolutionized our science in the last few years. That sounds exciting and innovative, and it's led to these really cutting edge technologies of personalized medicine and of gene editing. These are things that scientists get excited about. They're sexy science. They're things that sell papers. We don't want to sell papers though. We want to actually get drugs to patients. And I think that is why repurposing matters. We want to answer the question, repurposing, why bother? We want to say it is innovative, not innovative as many people seem to suggest. So why does repurposing matter then? Well, firstly, here's a bit of data that Claudia gave me a couple of weeks ago that shows you the gradual growth over the years and the number of conditions that have a molecular basis, and that number keeps going up and up and up. The question then becomes, though, what proportion of this bar do you guys think currently has treatments? How many treatments do you think are out there? And I believe we should have a little Mentimeter from Rachel for you guys to tell me your thoughts on this now. So I don't know if I need to stop sharing, Rachel. I can't hear you, but I'm gonna...
Oh, sorry, I think my screen is loading.
Oh.
That's what it says on here. Can everybody see it? Still seems to be loading. Here we go.
Aha.
Great. Everybody should be able to see that now. I think you're going to keep sharing. No? Okay, maybe Rick, maybe
there we go. Now we can.
Okay, maybe it's just very, very slow today. If you guys want to scan this QR code or put the Mentimeter code in, Sophie will also share on the chat the link that you could just click on. Yeah, and give us a thumbs up when you're connected. So one person is very speedy already on there. Great.
Oh, I see the thumbs up rolling in. That's good.
We've got a lot of people, so let's see all them thumbs up. Get some more on there, and then we can proceed to the question. If you've not quite managed to connect yet, you can just follow the link in the chat that Sophie sent, okay? Here we go. So this is the first question. Rick, do you want to go over it?
Oh, there should be the first question on... Cool. Now, yeah, so we're just asking now if you've considered potential repurposing in your condition. So just interested to see, who's been thinking about this so far. Okay, good to see that a number of you actually thought about it. So far, so good in terms of what I've been saying, which is nice. But a mixture, interesting. Okay.
Oh, I think that's most people. Let's
nice
see
balance.
the next
Nice balance.
question.
Okay, good. Okay, if you want to skip to the next one then, Rachel. Hopefully we've got one on the number of conditions. Yeah. How many rare conditions have licensed treatments right now? So we've seen from that data that Claudia gave that we're sitting at around the 6,500 mark. How many do we think are actually licensed? None of these are particularly big numbers. Okay, it's moving through. Okay, interesting. Too many people in rare disease too long. Yeah, okay, so we've got a big bias here towards the kind of 300 number. It is absolutely a low number, guys. The answer on this is in fact about 500 licensed treatments for these molecular conditions, but absolutely nowhere near as high as you would hope or expect. But I can certainly see from the diversity of diseases we've got here, I suspect a number of you guys are completely lacking any form of treatment as well, which is frustrating. Thanks, Rachel. That's grand. I will hop back onto my screen share from there. Cool. So yeah, that, as you can see here, we've got a little orange bar that reflects the number of active treatments. So the real point of this is very clear. There's a massive unmet need, and all of those exciting, innovative techniques that people get really carried away and excited about in terms of de novo drug discovery or gene therapies aren't necessarily filling this gap very quickly. We need to do something else and something different. And obviously, I think repurposing is one of the things that could make that difference. Alongside that, it's just simple. Drug development is hard. Filling that gap is tough because developing drugs and moving through the repurposing pathway or the development pathway is challenging. This is a figure that I believe about half of you have seen before and worked on with Claudia and some of the team here that outlines one schematic of the drug development process. And if nothing else, you can see a lot of different steps are required to move through this circle and meet that patient need that should start the process. You might express this figure in a different way. This is a more simplified scheme to give you an idea about the time and the number of compounds that move through it. What you can see is it's broken into a discovery phase, a preclinical phase, clinical trial phase, and regulatory. As you move through that, to get one new drug to market, it's estimated you need to start with between 5,000 and 10,000 compounds in that discovery stage. It's a highly inefficient process. You're going to spend about 16 years going from that stage to the final process. It's a slow process. And you're going to really spend a lot of time and a lot of effort and money to run through the science that's required. And you can map using these colors those stages to this figure here and just see how that breaks up and where all these steps are really biased. When you think about that complexity and layering the complexity and challenge of rare diseases, you can see why it's really hard to develop new treatments in this area, okay? We know that in any rare condition, you're going to generally have a small number of researchers or clinicians that know about it or actively follow that rare disease. You can have a small fragmented patient population. There's going to be a limited understanding of the disease natural history, limited knowledge of the disease pathways and mechanisms, and generally no existing treatment or no kind of clinical care pathway currently in existence. And that means it's really hard to work on these conditions. And if you've got a hard condition and you're trying to develop a treatment for it, you want to make your life a bit easier. And hopefully repurposing can give you the option for that, because you can work with a compound you know something about. You remove some of those unknowns from the equation and can begin to speed the process. So layering all that up, repurposing really does change the game of this drug development pathway. In this schematic, what you can see is if you're repurposing, you already have a drug that you know, so you get rid of that green bit at the start. You shave loads of compounds off, you shave years off, you speed up the process, reduce the cost. You can begin to use existing data to replace some of the experiments that are needed in the preclinical phase and the early clinical trial phase. Again, speeding the process, reducing costs. And that also allows you to shrink some of the numbers. You can reduce the number of compounds you might need to start with in the preclinical phase or screen, because you know the types of characteristics you need for your disease or the types of conditions that might work on that pathway. You can reduce, therefore, the time you're spending. And all of that is about speeding up the time it takes to get that drug into the clinic and into the patients. And that's where repurposing is exciting. And that's where it makes a difference. And you can see that same thing expressed on this figure that we shared with you before. By mapping in these other options, you're bypassing different stages in the repurposing pathway or even the line extension pathway to try and get you more quickly to a circle, to a place where you can actually meet patient need. So fundamentally, everybody, repurposing is lowering the barrier to enter research and shortening the time to patient benefit. And that's why it's exciting and has potential. It allows you to start a research program for a condition that no one else would try, i.e. it allows you to start a research program for a rare disease or an ultra-rare disease and have a chance at delivering patient impact. That's why you should care about repurposing, and that's hopefully why the rest of the stuff we'll tell you is of some interest. And with that, that's the end of my introductory talk. Hopefully we're not too bad on time, and I'll hand over to Eve, who'll take you through the evolving landscape of repurposing.
Great, thank you, Rick. I will just share my screen with you guys. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see that. Lovely. Great. So yeah, so while Rick may be joined by a very cute child, for me it's going to be a cat. And the cat does know a lot about repurposing. She's listened to Rick and I talk about it an awful lot. So if she pops up, be sure to ask a question. Great. So yeah, so as Rick was saying, repurposing is difficult. It's as difficult as developing drugs from a de novo point of view. But COVID really opened our eyes to the fact that we can actually get drugs accessed and to patients quicker, in a cheap way, and in a sort of a broad spectrum way across, it was actually across countries, continents, and in a really effective way. So that's opened the door to looking at new ways of looking at repurposing drugs for us now. So we've seen a lot more collaboration, particularly I'll talk a bit about some collaborations that are happening in Europe. There's a lot of collaboration between pharma now. Pharma are now very much more invested in the idea, more interested in the idea, that open to the discussion, whereas previously that this might be something that just was completely off the table for pharma. There's a lot of new opportunities for us to look at data and how we can use existing data to support new trials for repurposed drugs. As you know, a lot of people will be using ChatGPT, I'm sure. AI is adding a lot to the game. Literature mining, the use of electronic health records has really opened up opportunities for us. We're seeing a lot more openness from healthcare providers and healthcare in the UK in particular. And we have specific pathways that encourage repurposing, and I'll talk again a little bit more about that as well. On top of that, the regulators are recognizing that there is a need to support this type of drug development. And of course, that all means that we are seeing more success, which gives more hope, and it will be consistent feedback of more success, more hope, more openness, and more repurposing. So yeah, so on the flip side of that, there are still challenges. It should cut those figures down, those numbers that Rick showed you about the timing, the costing. We should be able to cut them down with repurposing, but there are certainly still challenges. Some of those challenges will be very unique to repurposing. Some of them will be exactly the same as if you were developing a drug from scratch. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you want to frame it, the threshold for clinical effectiveness is exactly the same as if you were developing a drug from scratch, which means you're held to a very high account with your data. You often need quite a big sample size to prove that your drug works, and you need a lot of data, which means that actually translating the work you're doing in repurposing can be really, really difficult, and sort of proving that the drug works in your population can be hard, particularly in rare disease, where your populations are not going to be vast. You're going to have a small subset of patients that you want to test your drug on. This also means that actually the business case can be quite risky for pharma. They perceive it as a risk, and they think perhaps this won't be a good return investment for them. So we need to think about how we can frame that and how we can make it look more attractive for pharma, and actually say, look, the success stories are happening, and yes, it might be a risk, but is this a risk we can frame in a way that is worth taking? And yes, the answer is we can. With the increasing amount of support available, there's a big lean towards supporting drug repurposing. There's specific pathways, as I mentioned, in the UK. So the NHS repurposing scheme has seen some great success in repurposing anastrozole for breast cancer. So that's a big success story that you can have a look into. I'm sure we can share some links, information about that too. So this is particularly focused on healthcare providers. As I said, they're a lot more open and willing to look at repurposing as an option now. They're recognizing that it is perhaps a way to save a little bit of money too, which, from a governmental point of view is absolutely great. There's also a very much increased willingness to share knowledge and increase the amount of knowledge that's out there. So we have 3 really great examples here of knowledge bases that map out the whole repurposing pathway and tell you what you need to know and what you should know at each point. So we have LifeArc doing a lot of great work with their toolkit. We have the roadmap toolkit, which it's very US focused, but I would say that the same challenges apply in the US as they do across the world. So it's still a very useful tool to have. And of course, ERDC have developed their drug repurposing guidebook, which is a little bit more meaty and a little bit more in depth, perhaps leaning more towards academics there. We also are starting to see now some exciting new business models. So Esperare are sort of leading here by going to pharma and saying, what can we do with your shelf compounds? What can we do with the data you've already got, and how can we translate that into a new trial, utilizing what you've got to create a return on investment that might actually mean something to you as the pharmaceutical company, instead of just having that asset just sitting there doing nothing for you. So all very promising in summary. On top of that sort of support at the ground level, giving information and giving support to academics and patient groups throughout the process, we have seen an increased lean from the regulators to support repurposing. In the UK, we have the innovative licensing and access pathway, which is much easier to call ILAP, which is what I will do day to day. They really focus on supporting novel trial designs in unmet need areas. So that is really attractive to rare diseases, where there's obviously a huge unmet need. You saw the graph Rick presented. There's not enough licensed drugs available for rare disease. So they're really looking for those novel trials for unmet need, and they will support different ways of getting scientific advice and different ways of getting a drug actually to patients. We also have the EMA looking at supporting academics and patient organizations. I think this is particularly important because the EMA are recognizing that the people that are driving drug repurposing projects are actually patient groups, and they're the people that we should be looking at supporting here. So yes, particularly encouraging to see this sort of support coming to the fore. And where do we fit into this? So there are now, as I said, some EU funded initiatives happening all in parallel, which is quite exciting. The landscape really is changing. So I think the baby of the group is Sympathic, who focus on particularly on rare neurodevelopmental disorders. They're looking at focusing again on those specific different clinical trial designs and how you can get data from a trial that is different to what is expected from the regulators now. So looking at different ways of getting different populations, different outcomes from a smaller sample size, which is really exciting. We have Repo for EU. These guys are looking a lot more at the lab-based research and the preclinical research there. They're going a lot more in depth and working with industry about looking at how they can build those models, use AI platforms, use the data there at that very, very start of the process level. And then you have us at REMEDI4ALL. So that's where we work with our colleagues, Claudia at Eurodis there. And we aim to cover, very optimistically, but I would say very successfully so far, the full drug development pathway. So we're looking at everything from having an idea about what you want to repurpose to actually getting it all the way through the process and getting it to patients. And our main focus is doing that in a patient-centric way. So we're consulting patients and putting them in the middle of it at every point. And I'll talk more about that later. So yeah, so given that there is all this support available and people are recognizing that patient groups are the drivers of repurposing, it'd be really interesting, and I think Rachel's going to pop you into some breakout groups. If you can just think about what roles do you think patient groups can play to support repurposing? And then if you can suggest one person in each group comes back and feeds to us one key point that you've discussed, that would be really fantastic. As I say, things are certainly happening, but we know more needs to happen. So where do you think you guys can fit into the landscape? Rachel.
Perfect. Yeah. So I hope everybody has had a chance to note this question before I send you into breakout rooms. I'll take that as a yes. And don't forget to elect a spokesperson so we can run through quickly. Okay, I'm going to open the rooms now. And we'll give them 7 minutes. Yeah. Okay, let's go.
Hello.
Hi guys, welcome back. So you should have had a bit of a chance to discuss and also have elected somebody to speak from your group. So if everybody who is a spokesperson can put their hand up, raise their hand, use that feature on the Zoom. Solanne's managed.
We didn't actually decide who it was going to be. Goran, did you want to do it or do you want me to?
Joe, I think you volunteered yourself now.
Yes, please go ahead. I have some really limited bandwidth, so.
Okay.
Perfect, great. And I think Eve will go through you guys, right?
Yeah, great. So on my screen, the first person here is Celine.
It depends, sir, if you want to pronounce in an English way or French way. So I accept both of them. So what we discussed was more the involvement of patients in the beginning and give a patient point of view, have a patient point of view on new clinical trial, supply real world evidence, also mention the potential risk, and yeah, the inclusion of patient in every step of the way. So basically we discussed that.
Perfect, great. My next person here is Sophie.
Okay, should be on mute. It's in different order, but we think initiating the process is right at the top, providing data, and then I'll just read everything else because I ran out of paper. Recruitment, awareness, outcomes, stroke clinical issues, supporting not only peers in terms of the patients, but other patient advocacy groups. Bringing together stakeholders, clinical trials, identifying the need, strength where you've got similar diseases, for example, calcium channels, and pathway for others.
Perfect, yeah, and that's some of the things we're seeing in these initiatives like sympathic to our grouping diseases, so that's really interesting to hear. Rebecca, you're next on my list.
Thank you. A couple of key points came up for us. I suppose that the first in the journey is defining need, what we want this drug to actually do, what is it a key symptom that we want to get under control, and what is the patient need, and help really define those kind of clinical goals before we start the process. I suppose taking another step back is ensuring that we're on hand for policy support as well. So we're playing our role in ensuring that the process is smooth and equitable enough so that we can have access to drugs and make sure that the regulatory process is enabled for rare disease patients. Discussions regarding safety as well, ensuring the safety of a drug going through the process and how patient groups can support there, and also general support through the process and onwards to delivery into the patient community, ensuring that there is awareness around this as well. I hope I've managed to capture all of our points, but yes, 5 minutes went very quickly.
Great, yeah, thank you so much, Rebecca, that's fantastic. Jo, you're next up.
Thank you. I think everything that everyone else has said so far makes perfect sense, and it's some really, really amazing thoughts and ideas. So I won't sort of repeat too much. One of the things that I think hasn't necessarily been mentioned that we were talking about was about helping determine the endpoints of the clinical trial, really helping to ensure that what might be considered a clinical endpoint actually is relevant to the patient, and making sure that that is part of it, but being part of the process all the way through.
Fantastic, yep, completely agree there. Thank you. Next up is Wendy.
Oh, Wendy, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm now heard. You can hear me now. We got stuck in the beginning where to find such a drug, and afterwards we thought about systematic disease, because you have a doctor for your mouth, for ENT. You have a doctor for your liver, for your kidneys, and all those kind of doctors. And you need them all, I think, and you need a multidisciplinary team, and with the patient to guide the direction. But you need the team. You need a multidisciplinary team to have a go at the drug repurposing, and that's something that came from all the different ideas. And also, I really liked the previous one I heard. Thank you for that.
Great. Yeah, so you're talking about having that discussion between everyone who should be involved and making sure that that works well. I think that's really important. The next person on my list, this may be your surname, I'm not sure, but I'll just roll with it. It's DeCarmo.
It's Anna De Carmo. Yes. So, hello. I think it's also important to consider patients in every step in clinical trials and drug repurposing, and I think they are very important in reporting the side effects, the adverse events that they may previous report for other drugs and try to translate that experience, because they function like a cohort, and patient associations may ability the investigators to establish the personalized clinical endpoints already referred here. I also think even the personal experience and the patients are not only patients, they have education and information that could add value to the discussion, not only view the patient as a patient, but as a person with a background that could be useful for establish a clinical trial and drug repurposing the plan. And they could act simply as a group support in the patient of the patients during the trial or during the drug reporting. I think it's something to add to what was already revealed.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, all really great points as well. Thank you. And I think I have Goran next.
Yes, sorry, I was muted. I have one thing, and this might be a tricky one, but if you're running like a clinical trial and there is some new drug that is a really life changer that really helps patients, that there is an agreement, how will they actually be able to get the drug even after the clinical trials? So it's not just a stop and then they have to go back to some treatment that didn't work. To have some plan for that already when they set up the clinical trial, how to continue if the drug is really, really well working.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic point. Thank you for that. And then my last person on the list is Jean-Baptiste.
Yes, so not to repeat too much, but we discussed about the endpoints as well to really match the needs of the patient community. And we added that it has to be done in a timely manner. So of course, as early as possible, but maybe to match this with the research phase. And in terms of trials, to make sure it's feasible, it's not with the whole visits or examinations, etc., to make sure it's not too demanding on patients. And so the feasibility, and then both feasibility during the trial, but also during the monitoring, the after the trial, and also to offer support in communication and fundraising, which was key. But then everything that has been discussed, of course, it's just add-ons.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Yeah, great. So I will carry on with my presentation, but I'm pleased to say, working as part of REMEDI4ALL, actually, I hope I can show you in the next sort of 10-15 minutes that we are trying to address all of these things by involving patient groups and patients in every step of the way. And I'm so glad to hear that the things that you think are priorities are the things that we think are priorities too. So I will share my screen again and I will run you guys through what we're doing with REMEDI4ALL. There we go. And hopefully you are with me now. Possibly, there we go. So yeah, so REMEDI4ALL, what are we? We are a big consortium within the EU of 24 organisations. These organisations span the full pathway of drug development. So we've got the guys that are just doing the thinking about what could be repurposing, what could be repurposed. We're doing the guys that do the preclinical testing. We've got the guys that think about clinical trials, And we've got the guys that think about what you were saying in terms of access, reimbursement, and actually making sure that the drug does get to patients in the end. So a really interesting and really fun consortium to be part of. We all get along quite well, I think it's fair to say. And the conversations we have are really fruitful and always patient-centric. So yeah, so what is the approach of REMEDI4ALL? As I say, we say patient-centric, and that is a term that can be thrown around quite loosely and not actually, held to account, which I think is very important. So how we approach this in REMEDI4ALL is that we have end-to-end project support from true experts in the field, and that support is dependent on the stage of development that the drug repurposing project is in, and actually what the anticipated next steps are. So what the project thinks is going to be important, and then what the discussion from within the consortium thinks are the important steps to take into account. We can then point the projects in the direction of experts who are thinking about funding, or experts who are thinking about regulation and getting it over those hurdles, making sure that the drug does get to patients with this expert support. On top of that, we're really thinking about supporting the entire environment around repurposing, making sure that infrastructure is being built and supported in terms of policy, making sure that we're thinking about raising the key issues and the potential solutions as well. It's one thing to raise issues, but it's a more important thing to have the discussions within this consortium and beyond to think about the solutions to coming over these policy barriers. And our policy board are very engaged and very active in terms of engaging with the environment that exists now and thinking about how to better that. We do have a patient-centered approach, and patient access is at the core of everything we're doing in REMEDI4ALL. Every single partner in this consortium, we ask them, okay, but what does this mean for the patients? How is this getting this drug from here to patients in the clinic? And I will talk a bit about how we keep that accountability later. And the next thing is that we look at repurposing from a bit of a different point of view. A lot of research is happening, and what you'll get at the end of it is a really lovely paper and a lovely bit of data, which is great, maybe in 20, 30 years' time when someone else is looking at this drug. But what we're thinking about is looking at something called a target product profile and considering what you actually need to be looking at in a research project to make sure that a drug goes from the idea to actually being a usable product in the clinic. So yes, so how do we make sure that we're not just saying patient centricity and we're actually making it happen? We do put the patient voice at the heart of everything we're doing in REMEDI4ALL. And we sort of have, I would say, 3 major points of contact that, again, I work with Claudia and Judith at Eurodis to deliver on that. And these 3 points of contact look like a patient champion, which I will explain more about very soon. Patient advocacy groups, I'm sure, is something that you're all familiar with. We tailor the patient advocacy group to the project. So some of them, it might be a consistent follow-up where we're having consistent discussion about quite a broad range of topics. Sometimes we'll form an advocacy group to focus on a specific project. So for example, I can tell you that we're looking at forming an advocacy group right now to think about some trial endpoints and some trial safety measures that you guys brought up as important to be involving patients with, which is really exciting. On top of that, we have multi-stakeholder meetings, which brings, as the name suggests, a lot of different stakeholders together. We have industry, we have regulators, we have patient groups, and we have clinical trials specialists, everyone we can possibly get in a room talking about a specific topic. We have a very exciting meeting coming up in June focused on osteogenesis imperfecta, and we are going to be talking about patient-centered trial design. So we're going to incorporate what we were saying about outcome measures, how we can use patient-reported outcomes and build like a really nice data package around that to ensure that trials are meeting patient need and not just getting a nice paper published. Yes, so building on that, I did promise I was going to tell you about a patient champion. Here you can see our patient champion wears a cape because that is how we view them. Leading this project from the patient-centric point of view, we ideally like the patient champion to be someone with lived experience of the disease that the repurposing project is focused on, or someone who is very well connected to that community. So the idea is that they can sort of fairly relay the thoughts and feelings of the community and what they're thinking, how they're responding to what we're doing in REMEDI4ALL. The goal of that is to actually make sure what we're doing is held accountable to that patient-centric ethos from the individual, but actually from a broader patient community too. We like having someone on the ground every day that we can refer to, but having that extra insight into the, the different spectrum of disease, the different experience of disease in a, even country to country, it differs. Having that is really important to what we're doing in REMEDI4ALL. And our patient champion serves as that person who is a connection for us and the full team in REMEDI4ALL to the patient community. It's a big job. So yeah, so here are some of the roles and responsibilities of the champion. And I know we were talking about burden and timeliness and actually making sure that engagement is not too burdensome for a patient champion. And that is something we really ensure by having frameworks like this. We have robust frameworks of our expectations, what we want from the patient champion and what they're expected to do. And we can be flexible with that while also making sure that they feel that they are involved and they are very much as much of an important partner, an important player in the project as anyone else with a PhD, with a doctor, with a professor in front of their name. The patient champion sits at the same level in the same meetings as all of these people too. They will have the opportunity to connect with experts from all levels across the repurposing pathway. So they'll be talking to the PIs, they'll be talking to the regulators, they'll be talking to the preclinical guys about what matters to them. It's a really unique opportunity to actually get that patient voice, get that patient need about what a project is all the way through the pathway and at every point. Supported by us as a patient engagement team to a small extent, we just give them that platform and ensure that they feel supported and have the information they need to go forward into these meetings and communicate what they need from the research team. But actually, our patient champions are fantastic in telling us what they need. And a lot of the time, it's us just making sure we're following up on that with them. So yeah, so part of the patient champion's role is engaging with the research repurposing development team, sorry. What that means is we currently have 4 projects within REMEDI4ALL that are at different stages of development. So we've got some that are very preclinical, some that are in clinical trial phase already, and some that are a bit conceptual too. We won't talk about that. So yeah, so all these different development stages allow us to look at and identify the problems that could come up at each stage of a repurposing project, which is really interesting in helping us learn and develop for the future best practices for supporting drug repurposing. What our current repurposing development team looks like is the project team. So that's the people that you would expect to do day-to-day running of the trial, the people that are going to set up the trial. So this is like the clinical team. And if we do have someone who is providing a drug for the trial, they will be involved in this sort of discussion too. That's where the patient champion sits within this project team. We have the REMEDI4ALL team. So that's just sort of our management team who just oversee everything, make sure everything's heading in the right direction and is upheld to the ethos and to the, the overall goal of the project that we have. And then we have the experts who perhaps are the most interesting people and the most diverse people we have in the group. The experts can offer very bespoke support depending on where the project is, what the next steps are, and this will be totally different depending on what project you've got. You might already have great patient engagement plans produced for your whole project and you don't need us. Great, I'd love to hear that. But you might need a bit more help with actually understanding how you're going to get your drug over those regulatory hurdles. What are the best approaches to take for that? And we have those guys that can support you through that part of your project. Yes, so part of that, coming back to what I was saying about taking a slightly different approach to research in general, I would say, is focusing on this concept of a target product profile, which is a TPP, which is rather nice to say. I encourage everyone to have a go. The nice thing about using a TPP approach is that this is something that industry are quite familiar with, which might improve and increase the attractability of repurposing to industry. If you're talking their language, they're going to like that a lot. It also means that at each point of the process, once again, we're asking, okay, this is what we think we need, but how does this match up with what the patient need is? And we can look at, again, we were talking about, do patients want a cure or do patients want symptom management of a key, of the most burdensome symptom they suffer with? We talk about what the rationale of the project is, so why we think a drug will work and how that will work and what that will look like for a patient. We think about what data we already have and what data we need, so that we're not repeating tests we don't need to repeat. If there's already good, robust data we can pull in and use from somewhere else. And then importantly, we think about what the route to market is for that drug. This is where that attractability might come into play a little bit with industry. This is something that Rick will be talking about in his next talk too. So in summary, this is what repurposing looks like. And I'm sure you'll agree, dead simple, really easy. Not much to it at all. But yeah, so the truth is that repurposing is just as complex, as just as many challenges as drug development from a novel drug point of view. It's complex, it overlaps, it ebbs and flows. You're going to have to put a lot of effort in at the start, and then it might go quiet and a bit more effort again. But the one thing that we agree should be consistent throughout this is patient engagement. Patients should be involved at every step of the way, and it should be consistent, continuous, and each one of these steps, each one of these development processes should be addressing what patients need. And with that, I hand back to Rick.
Thank you very much, Eve. All right, let me put my slides back up. Okay, everyone see me okay? Cool, I'll make sure I can see you. So Eve's taking you through there, the kind of shifting landscape in repurposing, and hopefully you can see from my original talk why you should think it's interesting and why it matters to rare diseases. And from Eve's talk, get an idea of the kind of support that is out there and does exist for repurposing projects, and how some of these larger consortia are starting to think about managing projects forward and how you might engage with those, the kind of role that patients can play in that. What I want to talk a bit more about now is how you should think about the strategy of driving a repurposing project forward. Because that's really the key piece here. You only want to do one of these projects if you think it can actually make a difference for your patients. And that's fundamentally what we want to be thinking about as patient organizations. So really the question becomes, how do we deliver a repurposed drug to patients? Not how do we prove a drug is efficacious or prove a drug is safe, but how do we get it to a place where patients can actually be benefiting from it in the clinic or at home? And what this comes down to is thinking about the types of target drug you're going to be working with, thinking about the mode of delivery, and thinking about how those choices will allow you to collaborate with different people to take different opportunities to move the treatment through to a place where it can reach the patient themselves. So we'll start with the possible targets. And when you're repurposing, there are kind of three pools of compounds that you can start playing with that give you a drug to repurpose. And the first of those is probably the one you're going to be most likely to look at in a kind of academic or patient group setting, which is generic drugs. You can pull into the wealth of existing generic medicines that are available on the market for one or more existing illnesses. And a generic medicine is very simply one of those which is no longer protected by intellectual property or by a patent. No one currently owns the rights to make that specific molecule. And what that means is it can be produced by lots of different companies, and it's likely going to be prescribed quite widely to lots of different patient groups, patient sizes, age groups, and therefore there's lots of data out there about how it functions and what it does. A second group that you can think about are current branded compounds. So these are compounds that are protected by intellectual property. They do have a patent. And this means they're on the market, but they are only produced by a single patent owner, a single company. Only they can make that, they control it, they have the monopoly until that patent expires. The third pool of compounds is one we don't think about quite so much, but we have mentioned in this webinar, which are shelved compounds. These are compounds that are sitting somewhere on a shelf. I like to imagine a funny little fridge shelf in a pharma company with people in suits going to stare at them. But essentially, it's a shelf full of different drugs that have been developed to a certain stage. And the things we're most interested in repurposing are those drugs that have been through clinical trials to a point. They've shown themselves to be safe in humans, but for some reason weren't brought to market. And that might be because the business model didn't look robust enough for the company, or it might be because the data they generated to test the efficacy, the effectiveness of that drug in their target population wasn't good enough at the time. So they're sitting there with a patent, but not currently developed. And these have another real potential for us in the repurposing space. broadly speaking, you can ignore this, but there are lots of different terms for repurposing, another of which is drug repositioning. Oftentimes people refer to repositioning when you're dealing with these yellow compounds here, with compounds that still retain some kind of intellectual property, with repurposing generally referring to generics. But don't get too wed to that, because people will use every different phrase whenever they feel like it. I may fall into this by habit though, so I want to explain it here and now. Right, so what are the different pros and cons of using the different types of targets? And here I've got some tables, because tables are great and everyone loves them. They're not very good for slides though, so forgive me, but after this webinar, you'll be very grateful for my promise. If you've got a drug that's under patent, there are serious pros and positives, okay? First, you have an obvious route to approach an industry partner to develop that drug for your condition. There's one company that owns the patent that makes the drug. That's who you go and talk to. That makes things very simple. There is also a clear potential business benefit to repurpose that drug for the patent holder. If they can repurpose it successfully, they can sell their drug to more people while it's under patent. That means they'll make more money. And also they'll do some more good, which is another thing pharma companies are trying to do as well. We just tend to focus on the money for obvious reasons. So that means there's a clear approach if you have a drug that's under patent, but there are challenges. And the real challenges that pharmaceutical companies are conservative when it comes to making research decisions. It costs a lot of money. It's a hard process to develop a new drug. So they want to believe they've got a good chance of it being successful before they invest money into it. So you need to convince a company to take that chance and to do that development. That might be because they're worried about generating negative safety data. It might be because they're worried about the costs. It might be because the market share might be quite small in their opinion. But regardless, they wanted to see it de-risked to make it more likely they succeed. And to do that, generally, in my experience, you need to have some form of clinical evidence. That is evidence that when the drug is in a person living with that condition, it makes an impact on the condition. If they've got that, they're probably going to be more likely to move it forward and develop that treatment to move forward. And the other issue, if you're working with an under patent drug, is there's going to be somewhat less understanding of the safety of that drug outside of that patient population. It's not been used widely. It might not have been used widely in different age groups, in different condition areas. So the safety knowledge we have is limited to a little subset of the patient population. That shifts when you're working with a generic drug. With a generic drug, you've got loads and loads of data on human use. In some cases, it's been used for 50+ years. It's coming out of your ears. We know everything there is to know about aspirin, for example. We've used it all over the place. This is a wealth of information for repurposing ideas and for understanding the impact of that drug in a new population. The drug is likely to be low cost because lots of people can make it, which opens up competition and drives prices down. This is good. And it also is likely to be quite widely produced. So that isn't always the case with some generics. This all means it's accessible for off-label use, which is a concept we'll be discussing more later. And this makes it ideal for an academic-led clinical trial because there's opportunity to operate, there's freedom to operate. It's easy to get hold of this drug and make this drug. So you can do your research, and that's what we're about here. The challenges for generics come down to actually getting projects funded and moved through to market. And we have to be really clear and explicit about that. It should be, and it is super appealing to repurpose a generic drug because you know a lot about them. That makes life good. Unfortunately, you can't get intellectual property on those generics very easily. Once it's generic, you can't get a patent to say, I can make this molecule and only I can make this molecule. You can only get a patent to say, I own the right to suggest using this molecule to treat this condition. Unfortunately, with the way the pharmaceutical system and the delivery of drugs and prescription of drugs works, it's very hard to defend that patent. It's always possible if you've got your drug that you've named super aspirin, which is a stupid name, it's always possible for someone to go along and just say, oh, it's the same as aspirin, we'll prescribe aspirin because that's cheaper, into that same population. It does the same thing. And what that means is you as the owner of super aspirin won't make a lot of money back from it. And if you won't make a lot of money back from it, you're less likely to want to invest in it in the first place and less likely to want to fund the development of super aspirin. So super aspirin doesn't get developed and no one gets a treatment. And this is the fundamental problem we see with generic drug repurposing and something we need to address and tackle as a repurposing community. Essentially, there is an off-label prescription of alternative generics, which is hard to detect, hard to prevent, and makes the business model less viable. So pharma companies can't recoup their investment. And this is the challenge we keep hitting in this space. In a generic drug, the cons are there's less options to defend your intellectual property, there's less obvious business models for industry partners, and that means you're going to likely have to find a way to move it forward without that industry support. The current formulation of your drug, the way it's delivered or turned into a chemical entity, might not be the perfect one for your patient groups. You may have to change that, leading to further development. And when running a clinical trial with a generic drug, you always have to just be conscious of and plan for the fact that patients might be able to access this drug outside of the clinical trial. That means there might be hard for you to run a placebo-controlled arm, or there could be some confounding data out there that might make it harder to analyze your results and generate the evidence you really need to prove this drug works to get the thing to patients later. That's something you can manage, but it's always worth being aware of. So that's how your kind of target type affects the situation. One thing you can do in this space, though, if you want to get pharmaceutical companies involved, is think about what we call reformulation. So in pharma, they do work with generic drugs at times, but they do that by changing the formulation. That might be tweaking the way the chemical is structured, hopefully to make it better for patients, but if nothing else, they can generate intellectual property or their patent from this. We can also change the dosing of the drug. A higher dose would necessitate and create some intellectual property, or the way it's delivered. You might change a drug from being an injection to an inhaler, for example. Again, all of this will generate IP. In an ideal world, this will also improve the administration of the drug to the patient and generate more patient benefit. By doing this, though, you are unfortunately required to generate new safety data. So generating the IP will mean you lose some of the benefits of repurposing we talked about right at the start, because you're going to have to do more safety experiments and it's going to cost more money and take more time. But this does allow you to access those usual routes to market that pharmaceutical companies will use. Right. We're meant to be doing a question here, but I'm looking at time. I think I'm just going to dive into this and give you guys time to ask me questions at the end. So there are two delivery routes. You've chosen your generic or your on-patent drug. Now you've got to work out how you're going to get it to patients. And these two routes are on-label prescription and off-label prescription. On-label prescription essentially is the kind of gold standard approach you want to be moving to if it is at all possible. And essentially this means you're securing a marketing approval, a license for you to sell that drug into a territory to patients. And securing that means that you've generated safety evidence and efficacy evidence to show this drug works that patient population. That's what we want to go for if possible. Off-label prescription is different. Off-label prescription is when you prescribe a drug to a patient population for which there isn't a license in place. You're giving someone aspirin to treat something that aspirin isn't licensed for example. This can happen because doctors are allowed to prescribe drugs in certain countries, some they're not, if they believe there's going to be clinical benefit for it. And this gives you a different way you can try and deliver your drug to patients, a different way to access market, but it comes with a number of challenges, which I'll dive into now. So if we're looking at on-label prescriptions, securing the market, there's some real pros. A marketing authorization gives you a route to secure reimbursement in lots of different countries. Reimbursement is when the government says they'll pay for it, a national health service will pay for that drug. That's what you want to see, because that means you can then generate uniform patient access in the countries that are reimbursing the drug. So rather than there being clusters of patients in different areas of countries that may or may not get the drug, everyone should get it. And that's really what we want to see in rare diseases, of course. Securing a marketing authorization also generally suggests that you've generated really robust evidence of safety of that drug, and there's going to be ongoing monitoring of the safety of the use of that drug in the patient population. That's a reassuring thing to ensure that anything that's going wrong will be picked up and monitored, and people will be looked after in the appropriate way, and the drug really is being tested for safety properly, and that's crucial in the pharmaceutical industry. If we think about the cons, though, in an on-label prescription, because of all this, you're going to require a really high level of evidence to secure your license, which is important to show it's safe and efficacious, but possibly even a higher level of evidence to secure reimbursement in different countries. And more evidence means more time, more money, more work to get to that threshold to lead to patient benefit. That's going to be more longer, costly clinical trials, and you're going to need more industry expertise to do it. So it's quite hard to generate that bar without some kind of involvement from people who know about drug development. Off-label prescription, different again. In this scenario, what you're aiming to do is generate enough evidence to convince clinicians to prescribe the drug to benefit patients. So you're looking to run clinical trials that aim to do that. You're looking to disseminate the information about those trials in a way that can move through the clinical population that are going to treat those patients. This means you can probably have lower cost research, shorter studies, and you're likely to need somewhat less industry input or guidance because you're not going through the traditional gold standard regulatory routes. And this does give you a chance to secure low cost generic drug price. Now, all of that sounds great in a lot of ways, but it does come with cons, and it's really important to be very upfront about those. You fundamentally have lower evidence of efficacy and no monitoring of safety of the drug. And that is a compromise you're making, and that is more risky. And I think that's important to state upfront. And you're going to have more patchy access to the drug in something when you've gone for an off-label route. Not every clinician in the world that treats a patient or sees a patient is going to say, yes, I've read this paper and I think we should prescribe this drug off-label. And not every clinician will be allowed to prescribe a drug off-label. So you won't necessarily serve your entire population with this route. And there's always that chance that the drug that you're trying to secure your low generic cost on, the price could go up because a company might buy it and decide to inflate the price by 1,000%. This can happen, and there are cases where that's happened in the past. And similarly, the drug might disappear because not all generics are really widely available or widely used. And that can leave patients going from having a treatment to no treatment. So you lack control of the entity itself in this route. And that's, again, a compromise you need to understand. Off-label prescription is something that has real potential in these rare and ultra rare genetic conditions where there's no existing treatment, and it's really, really hard to secure the funding, the time, the investment that you need to generate the evidence to get that marketing authorization. It can give you a chance to make a step change where you can benefit some patients, collect more data to hopefully move yourself towards an on-label route. But I don't think it should necessarily be seen as the end goal, rather a step in the process, particularly in this rare and ultra rare disease space. How does all this pull together then? This is my last table. Love a table, as you can tell. If you're working with an off-label prescription model with a generic drug, fundamentally, you're unlikely to see any involvement from the pharmaceutical industry because you're not going to be reformulating that drug. You use it as is off the shelf in whatever dose or mode of delivery exists. You're going to end up with a lower level of evidence, and that's going to lead to lesser uptake into your patient population, but it will be a quick and inexpensive, relatively, way of running your research and getting something to patients. And you have the chance of securing a lower price for your drug. If you're trying to work off-label with a drug that's already under patent, you're going to really, really struggle. Pharma companies can't be seen to doing anything that's promoting off-label use. They can't work off-label. It's going to be hard to access the drug in that scenario. You're going to generate lower evidence as well, which you need to find a way to reach clinicians without suggesting the pharma company is supporting it, which can be challenging. And the drug price is going to be high as well, which makes off-label prescription more challenging and hard to get reimbursement for. It's just not going to be a route that's going to be very sustainable for you. In that scenario, you really are going to have to explore an on-label route for administration with an on-patent drug. And there you have, as we've said, pharma collaboration being likely because you have a good viable business model if you can convince them the risk is low enough. You're going to generate some really strong evidence for the viability of it if you can repurpose the drug effectively. And it could potentially delay generic takeover, which is a big incentive to the company to move it forward. But you're going to get the drug price at about the current value, which will drop off when generics come in. And finally, if you're looking to work on label with an existing generic drug, you have the potential to look for pharma collaboration because you could then look into reformulation, and that will open up more traditional business models to move the drug to market. You'll need to get your strong evidence for this because you're going to want to be getting a marketing authorization because you're making a different drug. That's what reformulation essentially is meaning. That will be a longer process with higher costs, but the drug price will certainly be a bit higher, but it won't necessarily be as high as one of these high orphan drug prices on market. And you have that control of the entity. So these are the kind of outcomes and decisions you want to be thinking about. Where are you trying to get to on your repurposing project? And what's the route that's going to be most sustainable, viable, or plausible for you and your patient community? And who do you need to bring in to make that happen? So in summary, when you're repurposing a drug, it's really vital to consider the route to patient benefit. I don't think you should start one of these projects without thinking that through carefully first. And you need to think about your candidate drug and the existing unmet needs and route to administration to do that successfully. If you've got the resources, which many of us don't have, But if you've got those resources, going on label is absolutely the gold standard. It's going to be the best outcome for your patient population because you can deliver that safely monitored, even access that we're all looking for in the rare disease space. But off-label delivery can be an option in some territories, and it can give projects a route to patient impact when they might not otherwise have it. And in those cases, what I really, really recommend is that patient groups should be working with the clinicians who are prescribing that drug to ensure you're collecting data about its use even after your trial, that you're building up more data, you're publishing on it so that you build a nice case, a nice wealth of data that can hopefully lead to later on-label prescription or later licensing or later uptake, and really that ensures you're monitoring the safety and use of the drug moving forward. And that is the end of my presentation on the complex world of strategy and drug development for repurposing. I hope that was useful. I'm sure there are questions. I've left just enough time for you to ask them to me, so I will shut up and see who's got hands.
Yep, guys, if you want to raise your hand if you've got a question, or type it in the chat and we can read it out if you're shy. Christina.
I just have one question. Something I for myself experienced is that I'm a patient of a rare disease, and I got other diseases which influenced during the treatment my rare disease.
Mm-hmm.
And as I told this to my doctors, to my specialists, they recognized it like I'm telling them side effects, but it was like, yeah, we know those side effects, but there was nothing else. They recognized what I wanted to tell them, that there could be something to help others with this information, that it worked or that it not worked, or that something happened in this or that way.
Mm-hmm.
So this was something I recognized. How can I, as a patient, give this information to a doctor without just telling him side effects, instead of telling him this could be a way to think about our problems?
It's a fantastic point, a great question, and quite a hard one to answer, actually. I think that kind of response is probably pretty common and pretty well expected. I wouldn't think you're the last person or the first person that will have experienced this.
Yeah.
I think there's no easy answer, but I think there's a role that patient groups can play in this if you are one of those groups that's able to begin to collect some data, whether that's through registries or other routes, or close collaboration with some clinicians to understand what's going on. And I think registries where you can begin to understand and collect side effects or information on ongoing treatments or tested treatments, and highlighting those types of effects into one central place can begin to stop people who are looking at data looking at it as single isolated cases, but begins to allow them to look at things in a more systematic way. And what you need to do is find a way to pull that information. That's not easy, but I think what you do need is, like I say, a patient group that's coordinating that, or a clinician that's really dedicated that can bring these things together. And bringing those to like a scientific advisory group for a patient group will be a really good way to begin to get people thinking about them in a serious way rather than a ad hoc way. I don't know if anyone else has got any thoughts.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Sorry, it's not easy.
No, I know. I tried a lot, but I wasn't successful.
I think, is it Anna next? Oh, sorry, you're muted, Anna.
Okay. Congratulations for the talk. I have lots of doubts. This is all new for me. But I was thinking if drugs that still hold a patent have more difficulties when they are proposed to a drug with repurposing, and if in these cases we can have easy access to stakeholders or industry financial support they like that they don't like if we are still proposing something that has a patent. And for the other side, drugs without a patent, how can we get financial support for the process?
Yes, very good questions. And Claudia, feel free to come in if I answer it superbly well. I think on the first point around whether or not industry want to support and it's easy to access support on drugs that have patents. The answer is it depends, to be perfectly honest with you. It will depend on the company, it will depend on the condition, and it will depend on the timing and who you approach. I think there are definitely companies out there that are keen to explore things, but I think industry, particularly the large big pharma side of things, are more advanced and developed in their thinking around shelved compounds now, and providing people and researchers access to shelf compounds to try and look at how they can move them into different areas. Whether they'll still take your rare disease project forward will really depend on how risky they see it and the benefit they'll see on the bottom line, unfortunately. There are definitely companies out there, though, that if you can approach in the right way for access to data or access to drug, that are willing to provide, say, free drug or free data to support a repurposing project, even with licensed drugs, but some that would be much less happy to do that with a drug that's already under patent. And I think my gut feeling is the closer that company is to the expiry of patent life, the more likely they are going to be cooperative. The nearer you are to the start of patent life, the less likely they're going to be cooperative, because it's a risk for them. In terms of accessing funding on generics, never easy, but there are lots of different groups out there that are thinking about funding repurposing. In REMEDI4ALL, we've got a funders network we've just put together, which has, I don't know, 40, 50 different funders in there across Europe and in fact across the world that are thinking about how you can go about funding repurposing projects and doing it more effectively and systematically. You are looking at the traditional academic grant routes in most cases. But there are a number of charities, whether large or small, that can put out funding in those ways too, but most are going to have a standard scientific review process for these kind of projects. We're hoping that that network can improve that process and help people think about what they should be looking for and actually promote repurposing funding as an option. If you want one answer of a place to look now, then Cures Within Reach, which is a US charity, exclusively fund repurposing opportunities in academics, and they have open calls for repurposing research funding that are regularly open, and they've got a website with I think they've got a funding portal where you connect projects with funders as well, which is a nice place to start. Anything to add, anybody? Not seen anything. Hope that answers it reasonably well, Anna, because again, big questions. I guess Erica. Hiya.
Yeah. Hello. So I represent a rare neurodevelopmental disorder. And today you talked mainly on the process after you already kind of identified the drug, the promising drugs. You didn't touch the area that is really at the beginning. So I hope maybe you will talk about this more in Barcelona, but this is something that we struggle, like how do you start first to find the stakeholders you need to start with this kind of project, and then also how to identify which in silico model is the best to model the disease that you want to treat, or maybe the symptom of the syndrome. So these kind of questions that we could, talk for a long time, but like just hope that in some way this will be covered in this in repurposing webinar or like later on. So this is one question, and the other one is off-label prescription, as you mentioned. I understand that the drug is on the off-label, the generic drug. Then the patients, like in our health system in Slovenia, you need to pay for that. You can maybe then get some kind of reimbursement if the government, says, yeah, it's on the list that you are entitled to, but in general you pay. And normally, if these are generic drugs, usually the amount is not that much, but still depends how often is how many times you have to take it and so on. So I was wondering if maybe if you have a population less than 1,000 on a global level, is there an option to have a continuous clinical trial in a way, or or a compassionate use or something similar that you don't actually go into, of course, not on labeling, but maybe even to avoid off-label prescriptions in a way. Okay, thank you.
Exceptional questions all, thank you. I didn't talk about, and we didn't talk about the identification piece because you could talk about that for a few days. And there's a lot of information there. If you guys want to hear about that, then I suggest you let us, Claudia, Rachel, and the Aurordas team know ASAP, and we will revise, tweak, and refine our plans for Barcelona to make sure we can touch on that in some way. And we can certainly find ways to share some more information about it. Suffice to say, there are lots of different opportunities now that are basically making the approach to identify repurposing opportunities more systematic. We've kind of gone from a place where it's all driven by clinicians or serendipity, even, you know, chance occurrences, to there being more approaches to do screening with existing libraries, more options with artificial intelligence, particularly in processing, natural language processing in literature, to identify opportunities. And there are companies out there, there are groups out there that are doing that stuff. And what you guys probably need to understand what those methods are and who is worth interacting with. When I've talked about this at past schools, what I've always said to people is it's great getting ideas, and you can pay good money to get lots of ideas for repurposing. But what matters is you knowing then what you're going to do with it and how you can actually move it forward, because all you're doing is moving a step ahead and not quite understanding where you can take it. And I think before you make any of those kind of commercial investments in that stuff, you need to have an idea of what the next step is that can move it forward. But we can talk more on that maybe in Barcelona or separately. So that's that piece. And I've forgotten what your second question was, which is silly. Quickly remind me, Erica.
Off-label compassionate use.
Yeah, really good point on off-label. It varies between countries. Some countries are just not allowed to do it, and that takes that off the table. In other countries, access might shift completely, which is really good to be aware of. So that should be part of your strategic decision making. Can you access it? The big trial idea is really interesting. I think that's what we need. We need innovation in the space. We need to come up with new models, new ways that can make off-label more accessible. That kind of scale of thinking would require a consortium, a collaboration between charities and companies, and you still have to find a way to fund that ongoing research. I think a kind of open registry study or an open label registry study is kind of what you're talking about there, but someone somewhere will have to pay for the drug to move it forward, and that's certainly something that's plausible, particularly in that small patient population space. But there must be a solution there that can be cracked if you can find a treatment that can make the impact that you're looking for. So yeah, great questions, poorly answered, but as best I could do at this point.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
We have one more from Serena, if we can answer really quickly, and then we'll wrap it up. She said, in my experience, a huge problem in drugs repurposing is to help academics to finance a clinical trial. As patient associations, what can we do?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. There's funding available in patient groups, which fund lots of the preclinical work oftentimes, but finding the clinical research funding is the challenge. I think fundamentally, as patient, the key role you can play is in conveying really clearly the need and the potential benefit of the treatment. It isn't your responsibility to go out and raise millions and millions and millions of pounds for a clinical trial, because that's beyond the scope of most the organisation sizes we are. But we do have access to the information, the knowledge, the understanding of what impact this treatment can have and how that will benefit the lives of patients. It's not just saying, oh, this hits this pathway, has this chemical effect, but what does that matter? What impact does that have to the individuals? And how can that impact be scaled across the population? And how can we find the way to deliver this to patients themselves? So thinking about the stuff I've just touched on there to show that there's a plan for those academics to actually deliver the impact, not just deliver the trial, I think is really important. Strengthen their application so that it can deliver something in terms of access, and strengthen their application by showing the impact it can have to the patients themselves and how that will affect lives. I think are the two areas that probably they are going to be weakest on by default. And I suppose one final thing you could do is encourage them to talk to other people and not assume they know best about their bit of research. Most academics are really great at their little area and not so good at the wider picture. So encourage them to talk to others and to look at different resources that are out there. We're going to be making lots of training resources in Remedy4ALL. So when those are out, I encourage them to look at those, talk to others, look at ERDOC task guidebooks. Don't just think they can do it themselves. They can't. And telling them that is actually going to be very impactful and give them more chance to be successful in those very, very competitive funding calls they'll be reaching. Again, we'll hopefully have better answers for this in a few more years of our project, but I think for now, that's a big role and a big impact you guys can play.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you to Eve and Rick, and also Claudia for providing so much support. I think we'll wrap up there. Just as a reminder, I'll resend again in the chat the survey. Please don't forget to fill that out. It really helps us to keep improving on the school experience for you guys. You should now have the link to the WhatsApp chat, and you will get the recording and the links to the slides, as well as the link to the WhatsApp chat on your school webpage that I've sent you about 1 million times now. So hopefully everybody's looked at it. And I will also send you an email reminder after this with all that information, plus the meal choices that you have to make for the schools before the end of the month. Okay? Amazing. Thank you so much, guys. And I hope you have a good April. And we'll see you. Well, I think we've got one more webinar for the MRD school, but the Scientific Innovation and Translational Research, we'll keep emailing you, but we'll see you otherwise in Barcelona. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.